Hello, everyone. It's another installment of the 007 Files. I'm Bill Koenig, and I'm here with David Lee. Our guest today, he has written for an entertainment website and wrote a fair amount about James Bond. He is now a magazine editor, but obviously he still follows developments in the Bond universe carefully, so we thought we'd get his thoughts. And Phil Nobile Jr., would you like to introduce yourself?
I think you did a pretty good job. It's my day job is horror movies these days, but I'm still very much paying attention to what's happening in the Bond world and following podcasts like this one and websites like David's and MI6, of course, with a detached curiosity, I guess, about what's next for Bond, because this new era does feel like it's going to belong to someone else ultimately, and maybe not older fans, but. We can get into all that, but yeah, I'm still very much an engaged observer.
Well, I thought we'd start. You used to work for, let me be sure I got it right, Movies, Birth, Death?
Birth, Movies, Death.
Yeah, there was one time I know I transposed two of the names.
Yeah. I always get it wrong.
Well, it's life. Birth, movies, death. It's all chronological.
Yeah. So, but there was something you wrote, and I will give the citation here. It's a lot closer than what a lot of other people had. On July 25th, 2017, you wrote a story for that website, and it ended with this passage. On the less official front, I have read thoughts from someone I believe to be close with the production that the Broccolis are looking to do one more, meaning one more Bond movie, then sell the franchise off a la George Lucas, Star Wars, Disney. If that comes to pass, it will be interesting times indeed for Ian Fleming's Gentleman Spy, unquote. It was a little more complicated than that, but what eventually happened. But as I said, that was definitely in the ballpark.
It's technically true, yeah. That's what happened.
What do you recall about that time that you can talk about?
Sure. I mean, well, you did say that there was a lot of bad information going around, and I have to own the bad information too. I think I was the one that said, because I got it from someone who got it from someone in the studio, that Tom Hiddleston had been in talks and had been made an offer. And I don't know if that turned out to be true, or if that turned out to be nonsense, or something in between. Shortly thereafter, that someone said, "Oh, they were just doing it to lure Daniel back, and then to really get his goat, they met with Tom Hardy, and that apparently was like like a glove across the face to Daniel Craig or something." The way this person had told it. Now, who knows if any of that was ever true or just speculation? But I frequent a message board. I guess I shouldn't say which one or shouldn't out anybody, but there's a person on that message board who always seems to have early instant access to screen used props and items and things like that, and has intimated that they are close to that production or close to someone who was working for that production. And their information usually turned out to be true. They weren't gossips. They weren't, blabbing everything they heard. But you got them in a certain mood and they would divulge a little bit of information. And that was something that they had said that time, that the Broccolis were going to do one more and then sell it. And that's why I sort of made it as a footnote. It wasn't any headline news or anything, but it was like, this is what I heard unofficially. And it turned out to be true. And I still believe that person knew what they were talking about. I think they had inside information that was colored by a very clear disdain for the Craig era as well. So you had to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Anytime this person showed up on those forums with information, you were like, oh, are they legit? Is this just their opinion? Are they cranky? But that particular piece of information was so weirdly specific that I thought it was worth mentioning in that order.
Just for the record, what eventually happened was the Broccolis didn't sell out totally. What they did was they formed a joint venture with Amazon to own the Bond film rights. So they retain an ownership stake, but Amazon now has the creative control and they're in the driver's seat. So in fact, we're coming up on the year anniversary of that deal being announced. So
kind of a sweetheart deal too, and not something you might have predicted back then, because it's a little unprecedented, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah. I wasn't expecting that to happen. I mean, I must have read your article, but I don't really recall it. But my thinking for a long time was that one of the big possibilities was that they were going to sell, and I'm sure that my thinking was influenced by that article, even though I don't remember it, because I just. It seemed obvious that it was one of the possibilities that could be on the table, and even though most Bond fans didn't want to believe that it was true, it's the way that real life works sometimes.
Yeah, and I'll say this: I don't remember writing it either. I was tasked with all the Bond news on that site because they knew I was the Bond guy. So any tidbit, any morsel, they would throw at me, to the point where I was just trying to write something every week in that space, even if I didn't have a whole lot to write about or say about the matter. But I also at the time remember thinking, oh, this is just fan noise because this is what George Lucas did a couple of years ago. And a lot of times fan theories are born out of what they're aware of and what they see happening elsewhere in the world. So I don't think independently that might have been arrived at. But after George Lucas did that was like the dam had broken, like unprecedented move that someone who outright owns an IP like Star Wars, for God's sake, would sell it off. It just seemed unthinkable before it happened. And then on the other side of it, you're like, well, who else is going to do that? And there's not too many other people in that position, too many other companies or entities in that position that would do that. But of course, Eon, and then they did.
Right. And just to contrast what the Amazon Eon deal was, George Lucas, he just sold it off. It was, in that way, it was a lot simpler deal. And then George, according to some accounts, tried to keep his hand in, and Disney kind of patted him on the head and told him to run along.
Run along.
You got your $4 billion.
Man, yeah, the Eon deal is crazy because it's basically they gave away the steering wheel, but they're still participants in the business and the profits therein, right?
Right. So we'll see. Well, one thing I wanted to follow up then, a little bit forward, December 2024, the Wall Street Journal came out with this story saying that essentially Amazon and Eon weren't just at odds, they were practically at war. And, Michael G. Wilson couldn't get his calls returned from Amazon and, stuff like that. And I remember you made a comment on social media. This was before the Amazon deal was announced. So sometime between end of 2024 and the early part of 2025, you said something like, I am on Team Barbara. And I got the impression this was part of an exchange, but I came in at the end and I saw that comment. What was your reaction when that Wall Street Journal thing was announced, but before Eon and Amazon reached their deal?
Well, on my social media accounts, part of my bio now says grieving Bond fan. So I stand by that. I think it's terrible. I continue to think it's terrible. I know we've got a lot of Bond fans, folks that will be listening to this, that are excited about the future and what this opens up and the possibilities, and that the Broccolis can get out of the way. But I still feel like there was something unique and not replicable about a family owning one of the biggest franchises in the world. I think it's incredibly special, and I think it's something to be mourned that they gave that away. Well, they didn't give it away; they got a nice check. But I don't understand the excitement for the richest man in the world owning James Bond.
Yeah, there was somebody. This was on another podcast, and it was a great line. He said, because of that family involvement, Bond was like the only movie franchise you could hear a line like, "I'll buy you a delicatessen in stainless steel." Not a corporate controlled IP wouldn't have that.
Yeah, you're going to have a thing polished to a shine by an algorithm instead of something with some shaggy edges on it and some wrong turns and some maybe weird decisions that kind of in the moment aren't great or don't work, but they feed the larger whole. anthropologically, the Bond franchise is a handmade thing made by a family, and that's singular in cinema, frankly.
Has your opinion evolved at all since the announcement was first made?
Me or Bill?
You.
I
know Bill too well.
I feel fairly stuck in my decision. I mean, I'm going to see what happens. I remember I wrote a long time ago when I was reviewing, or it was like the night before I wrote about Spectre, and I said, because the movie hadn't come out yet, and I said, I'm in a weird spot because the next James Bond, for the first time in history, will be younger than me. And I think that's maybe a moment.
I remember that.
Yeah, I've hung on to that because it really does seem to be a significant milestone for Bond fans. And I think I was already looking down the barrel of that, right, with this next turn. And now it's going to feel so not for me, I think, that maybe it was like ripping off the Band-Aid to some degree. Maybe an Eon-driven Bond 26 would be a harder thing for me to let go of or to sort of detach myself from and watch from a distance and not feel as invested or involved. But I don't think my opinion has changed all that much. And in fact, I guess I'm feeling worse about Amazon owning it in the year that's passed.
Okay.
How so?
Well, a $40 million documentary about Melania.
Yeah.
And another $35 million in marketing.
Yes.
$75 million total.
I guess I didn't know the leanings of the studios that used to run or distribute Bond, but it's a little in our faces these days, and it's harder to kind of separate my feelings about this global monolith that is bulldozing its way through our culture in a lot of ways, owning this thing that we love.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, David?
I am trying to remain optimistic about it. I mean, I do accept your worries about the whole thing that Amazon just owns a slice of just about everything in life at the moment, and that never ends well. So I would have preferred. I think I would have preferred the Bond to remain independent and, as you say, a family-owned business. But I just didn't see that it was going to continue like that, because I just thought the Michael G. Wilson retiring, which it was obvious that he wasn't going to continue in that role. I really wondered if Barbara would be able to continue without him, because she had always had him, and it's clear that their strengths were very, very different and complementary. So I'm sure she's a talented producer in her own right, and she will be able to go and make films. But Bond is quite a different thing from a $40 or $50 million budget movie, and it's that there are too many moving parts, and I don't think necessarily she has all the skills it takes to produce Bond on her own. And she could, of course, bring in a producing partner, but I think that dynamic would be difficult for her as well.
Yeah. I mean, surely there were other midwives in the mix over the years at Eon that were helping getting things across the finish line and getting stuff done. There's a lot of names in those credits that I see come up at 10-year stretches or 12-year parameters. I guess just selfishly, I thought, well, Eon will have a new chapter somehow, whether or not that's Greg Wilson or whether or not that's some other person in the family or a hire from within that felt more organic than a buyout by literally the richest man or second richest, whatever he is. Once
it's so many billions, it's not worth counting anymore.
It's just splitting hairs, yeah.
Well, yeah, because I saw this figure this morning. He was worth, in 2013, when he bought the Washington Post, which he bought personally, Amazon didn't buy it, he was worth $22 billion, something like that. Now he's worth $222 billion. Like, after a while, like you just can't. It's hard to get your mind around numbers like that.
I wouldn't know what to do with 1 billion. So
I'd like to try, but I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'll find out the hard way. Absolutely.
But yeah, and Bezos's image has definitely taken a hit lately as well. Now this probably won't affect Bond directly, but he throws a $50 million wedding. He buys a $500 million yacht, which I guess when that yacht goes, he's got to have another ship follow it for various reasons. And it's just, and he used to he was never modest. He didn't seem to visibly throw away his money. But after he got divorced, he's like, I don't care anymore. I'm just going to I don't care what you think about me and my money. I'm just going to spend it in the most obvious ways possible.
And that's the flip side of it is that maybe Bond, even though Bond towers for all of us in terms of our cinematic passions and influences and whatnot, Bond's a pretty small drop in the bucket to the Bezos mosaic, wouldn't you say? I mean, the biggest Bond film ever made $1 billion, right? That's the watermark. It made $1 billion. Like Amazon makes $1 billion a day.
Yeah.
What do they need Bond to do? And in that case, maybe they'll be left alone.
Yeah, that's like the water in his toilet every time he comes.
So
I mean, it is interesting. I mean, Bezos isn't especially active in social media, but the one thing he did say, I think it was after the deal closed. He was on X. He said, "Who would you like to see be the new James Bond?" It's like
he went crazy.
Just for people who were worried about Bezos, that was just right in your face. So I don't know. The other thing is, and we've talked about this on the 007 files. So they've appointed 2 producers, and both have decent track records, good track records. David Heyman and Amy Pascal, but they're only committed for the one. Maybe they do 1 or 2 more, but we don't know. But it's just not going to be the same. It's not like they're there. It's not the family passion or anything. Bond is now another corporate controlled IP. And if you look at the Batman movies since 1989, I don't know how many producers there have been, but they change all the time, because it's controlled by Warner Brothers and whoever owns them this week or later this year. But it's just different. And, I don't want to pine for the past. Things have, and something else I've said, family controlled companies are hard to keep together. It can be done, but, you really have to work hard at it. And I don't know if they ever had a succession plan or not. Nobody ever seems to have asked them that I can tell. The entertainment press can be kind of shallow at times, shall we say, and like things like that. That's businessy, and they'd rather talk to the latest Bond girl and get some quotes.
I had some sobering math to share with you guys, and it's a little pedantic, and maybe you won't agree with it, but if in 2028, until the moment the new Bond steps on the screen, going by Stanley Cup rules, Daniel Craig will have been the Bond of record for 22 years, which in 2028 will be 1/3 of the franchise's history.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's painful when I think that Casino Royale was 20 years ago this year. It doesn't seem possible, and it almost seems like Bond is trying to do the inverse of what Mission Impossible did. They started off slowly, and then started becoming more frequent, and Bond has done the complete opposite. And we don't want to go down the Mission Impossible route. Well, in fact, I've got a question for you about this. I saw one of the recent Mission Impossibles, and just a couple of weeks ago or so, and the the villain really was an AI, and you're quite outspoken about AI. So, would you like to see Bond take on an AI, or do you reckon a Bond villain needs to be, well, Jeff Bezos or somebody else human?
Well, I think the villainy of AI is very human. It's 5 billionaires trying to convince us all we need this thing that they've all invested in, or they're going to lose a bunch of money. So AI is a bubble, like any other scam or pyramid scheme or thing that a rich person needs to convince a poor person they should pay for. And that's what's happening right now. That's why AI is being shoved down all our throats in every, like my Gmail just told me I'm using Gemini now. I'm like, well, I didn't sign up for Gemini. What's that about? And it's why it's so dispiriting to see actual artists starting to use AI. They're being told that this is the future and they need to do it. Let alone AI doesn't work. Let alone ChatGPT is convincing kids to kill themselves. There are people that are heavily investing in AI, and if we don't use it, they're screwed. And so that's what we're seeing. And I think that's a very Bond villain kind of vibe in terms of classic Fleming. In terms of classic Bond movies, it's a human preying on the masses. So I don't know why we couldn't do something like that, but I guess I'd prefer if it was a little allegorical and maybe not so on the nose. You know, I think that the Mission Impossible use of the AI thing was, I think literally somebody showed Tom Cruise a deep fake video of himself and he lost his mind and said, hey, AI's a supervillain. And that's how you got that plot.
Yeah, I said on Blue Sky, it seemed like it was called The Entity. It seemed like The Entity was just a fill-in name until they could think of a proper name for it, but it made the shooting script.
It's like they never did figure out a good name. Yeah. so it stuck.
And it had very sort of, for all of the future tech and top level filmmaking skill of those movies, it felt very much like a 90s plot about a computer virus. Oh, we're going to get it into this little tube. And I'm like, well, that's not how that works, but okay.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of Mission Impossible at all. They lost me basically at the first one. And after number 2, I stopped watching them all completely until recently I went back. But yeah, I shouldn't have bothered.
There's peaks and valleys in there, and there's some really weird swings. I think it never bothered trying to adapt the TV series very often. It was very much just like heist movies.
It's its own thing completely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are exceptions. The fourth one, Ghost Protocol, they took 2 set pieces from the original series, of course, made them bigger and more giant and stuff. In one of them, there was, I'm not even sure you had the word drone, but it involved a drone going through like a ventilation system. And, it was a key part of the plan. And I mean, at the time, if you watch that episode now, you can actually see, in some shots, see the strings over the drone. But it was interesting and engrossing. And so in the movie, it's like Jeremy Renner wears like armor or something and is somehow levitated. Yeah, magnets and stuff like that. So, yeah, like I said, so there is some of that. But I mean, what happened with me, I saw the first one and I was pissed off because they turned Jim Phelps into the villain. And it's like, okay, that's it.
You and Peter Graves were really mad about that.
Well, and Greg Morris. Greg Morris was on a talk show and he said, no, I don't like that movie at all. So I didn't see 2 and I never saw 3. But then with Ghost Protocol, Brad Bird's going to direct it. It's his live action debut. All right, I'll go see it. And then I saw they had those 2 things based on the show. I said, all right. I guess I'll rationalize this. This is an alternate universe. It's totally separate from the TV show. But so I've hung with it since. But yeah, there's like specifically on the most recent one, the Entity was so-so. And then in the last movie, all these people are going up to Tom Cruise and saying how wonderful he is.
Really
like,
weird.
That probably added like 20 minutes to an already long movie.
It turned into a weird savior story, and it got a little heavy in the wrong way for me.
All right. So, Phil, is there anything that's been announced? They've announced director Denis Villeneuve. They have announced a writer, Stephen Knight. Knight's working on the script. Who knows what the timetable is right now? Is there anything in there that gives you, if not hope, it's like maybe might be less bad?
Well, like I said, like how successful does Amazon need a Bond movie to be? And the answer is it doesn't. Like good or bad, they're going to keep that IP and they're going to keep it going. So there might be a surprising lack of interference in this first one. They might just sort of let these people party, which could be a very refreshing Bond film in and of itself. I'm not 100% on the Villeneuve bandwagon. I think he's a little too serious and a little too dour to do what I was hoping the next Bond movie would do. I think we've had our fill of super serious Bond over the last 20 years. Call me crazy. But I do think Stephen Knight is a really interesting screenwriter. His credits are all over the place, but he does have interesting bona fides, and he's said the right things so far. So I guess if I'm hanging on to anything, it's that maybe this creative team can sneak one past the goalie and deliver something that doesn't feel like completely corporatized, algorithm-driven IP.
And you said, what you were looking for in Bond 26. What would that be? What would a Phil Nobile Jr. Bond 26 look like?
Well, I think I have articulated this somewhere else, and I'm going to try to remember it now. But I said that the trick would be, how do you take the sort of bon vivant Roger Moore vibe and map it to a guy whose job is, in fact, killing people? And how do you make that person not seem like a psycho? Or how do you thread that needle so that it's maybe a psycho who loves his job, but we're on board with it? I think I wanted at its essence, I wanted a Bond who loved what he did, maybe again. And I wanted something that, like, I don't want a kids movie, but I wanted a movie that you could show kids. I can't imagine showing a 12-year-old No Time to Die and them becoming some kind of Bond fan. I think I wanted a Bond 26 that was going to indoctrinate a new generation of Bond fans. And how do you do that creatively? I wanted to see what that looked like.
Yeah, because with No Time to Die, there was like one sequence that was kind of like that. And that was where Craig teams up with Ana de Armas, and that sequence. And it was for like 15, 20 minutes, whatever it was. It was like a flash, like, quote, classic Bond movie. And then we go right back into the dour stuff. But that because it was interesting when they had that it was in spring of 2019 thing from Jamaica, and I think Ana de Armas had jet lag or whatever. She didn't seem quite with it.
Yeah.
And they were like, and the banter was odd. It was just an odd event generally. It's like, ooh. And I was thinking, I don't know. But then, as it turned out, she was like one of the highlights of the movie, and even without that big a part. So,
yeah, I will lament that we didn't get someone like Edgar Wright taking a swing at it as a pivot from the dour, serious Craig era. And maybe I'm just selling Denis Villeneuve short, but I just don't see this in his CV. I don't see him doing a fun Bond movie.
No,
Wright. I was about to say real quick, Wright apparently did make a pitch, or at least he says he did. He didn't say exactly when this was. It might have been, but it sounded like it was probably before No Time to Die. But, he's interested in Bond references show up in his work. There was that one movie with the giant thunderball billboard.
Yeah, I don't want to talk out of school, but I did have an extended conversation with Edgar Wright at a film festival about these talks that may or may not have happened. And I will say that he was very famously replaced on Ant-Man.
Yes.
He was supposed to he cast the film and he got replaced, and he found himself in a position of not wanting to do that to another director. You take that for what it's worth. But I do know that he was very open to that phone ringing again down the line. So
the Daniel Craig movies were really the first to kind of embrace, continuity. Before they never really cared that much about it, and or to a certain extent, the Craig films started off not following any serious continuity. Then they, retconned it. But do you think you'd like to see Bond 26 continuing, or rather the Amazon Bond continuing that? Or would you like to return to the classic Bonds where they don't really care and it doesn't matter?
I feel like
really care.
I feel like Skyfall did that. That was an interesting moment because it was coming off of, Quantum's the first direct sequel we've ever done. It picks up 5 minutes after Casino ends, and I don't think that it was to the film's benefit at all. And then Skyfall felt like a standalone, which I thought was in 2012. You're sitting in the theater. That was kind of cool that you weren't weighed down with continuity and whatnot. There was backstory and there was like character histories, but it was all self-contained. And I've always said, the only thing a filmmaker should be focused on is giving us a great film between the opening and ending credits. If it's a continuity first kind of marching orders, that doesn't serve the film. That doesn't serve the piece of entertainment I'm sitting there to watch. And I know that there's a lot of fanboys who love some serialized content and love the continuity of the Marvel films and whatnot. But I think the Marvel films ran that until the wheels came off the bus. Frankly, there's so much on, I can't even keep track of what's happening on Marvel anymore. And I think there's probably a great way to do it. And I just don't know that they haven't yet. The Bond movies' attempt at continuity was not to the benefit of the series. But it's going to be all new creatives in place now. Maybe they've got a better idea or a new take on how to do that. But certainly I miss my standalone Bond movies.
Yeah.
Well,
completely. Yeah.
The Fleming originals had continuity, but it was done in such a way. If you had read the previous books, you knew what they were talking about. But if you were coming into it cold, it didn't matter. In From Russia with Love, the novel, there's a scene, it wasn't the KGB then, it was a different name, but they're talking about Bond's dossier. He did this, he did that. So if you had read his book, the preceding books, you knew what they were talking about, but it didn't matter because it was just, it's there and they move on very quickly. They don't wallow in the continuity. And there were other examples like that throughout the Fleming books.
And the films, too. I mean, they mentioned Dr. No in From Russia with Love at the film, and he's at Tracy's grave and from For Your Eyes Only, but it's all very Easter eggy. It's not plot dependent. Yeah. And that's the difference. Like, I think continuity becomes like an albatross at some point, and probably sooner than these people think, that it just doesn't benefit anything except folks that are counting on this sort of thing, who need to have like a checklist of,
For Your Eyes Only actually had a line in the script where the sort of Blofeld guy says, "This is the 10th anniversary of our last encounter," which was, okay, that'd be Diamonds Are Forever, which means he would have been Blofeld. But they took it out, probably for legal reasons, but like Marvel Comics had licensed the adaptation. And, the removal of the line came too late for Marvel because it's in the comic book. And so at the end of what is the pre-credit scene, Bond says happy anniversary after he's dumped the guy into the smokestack. So,
And then you get weird things like in No Time to Die, he's at Vesper's grave, and that's certainly continuity to the previous films. But in my head, I was like, oh, this is Daniel Craig's 5th movie. And just like from the beginning of For Your Eyes Only, it begins at his lover's grave. And I was turning myself in knots over like how it was sort of like beyond continuity, some kind of interesting callback within the franchise itself. Of Bond being sort of attacked by Spectre or Blofeld at the grave of his dead lover, which was more interesting to me than Madeline bringing him to Vesper's grave to say goodbye. Somebody did the math on. He spent 6 weeks with Vesper Lind, and he's just consumed for decades in the films, when he's had longer relationships with probably almost every woman that he's met since then.
Yeah. Well, but maybe that is Purvis and Wade returning to Fleming, because there is something in what is it?
On Her
On
Majesty's.
the Majesty's Secret Service,
Yeah.
when Bond returns to Vesper's grave every year. So I guess that's one of the Fleming moments that they've dug out, because there aren't many of those to come.
Sure. Yeah. And, that's probably fine. I think that an underrated thing of Roger Moore's run is that it wasn't dependent on what came before so much. It didn't matter that he drank martinis. It didn't matter that he smoked cigarettes. Now he's with a cigar. Here he is with the Lotus. You wouldn't get the Lotus if they were so hung up on Aston Martins back then. And I think that gave that a freedom and had it feel new and fresh, which I think the new one needs to do.
And they also, with Live and Let Die, the script, Mankiewicz dropped in a reference. It was when he was introducing Rosie to Coral Jr., and there was a reference to Dr. No in the script, which they obviously dropped. So, yeah, they just, it's as you point out, they didn't do martinis. He drank, bourbon neat in that movie. He smoked cigars instead of cigarettes. They were definitely trying to differentiate the Roger Moore Bond from his
But let's call this guy Coral Jr. Let's make sure.
Yeah.
That was such a curious choice to me.
Yeah, I mean, in the recent Bond films, that they've been laying it on far too thick with vodka martinis and the Aston Martin DB5 again, and it's just ridiculous. You expect these things to come up, and you know that they're what Bond does, and they're part of the Bond myth, but you don't need it to be bashed over the head every bloody film. And it's time for the DB5 to go. It has to go. If that's one thing that Amazon must do, is say no to the DB5.
I was about to say, with the martini, with at least the first couple Daniel Craig movies, you went from it being a phrase, shaken not stirred, to a paragraph. Oh, it's this, and you mix this, and it's this many measures. And I realized, that's based on the book, but books are different than films, and you don't need 2 minutes to explain a martini. We've gone for a little while. So, Phil, is there anything you'd like to add?
Gosh, we covered so many things. I'm excited to see actual news, I guess. It's been really interesting watching Bond fandom and podcasts and pundits sort of like live on breadcrumbs for the last 3 years. And it's forced some folks to get rather creative in how they sort of engage in the fandom. And I don't mean that as a negative. It's been fun to see the different ways that folks like Calvin Dyson and you guys and other folks sort of have kind of kept the fire going.
There's a lot of activity which didn't happen before between films. Yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah, I noticed there's a Macallan out celebrating the 55th anniversary of Diamonds Are Forever, which I thought was kind of amusing. On a year that ends with a 6, you don't have a lot of anniversaries to celebrate for Bond. And so they're getting creative. 55th. Why not? But I'm really excited for actual things to start happening, because we're all going to explode. Like the thoughts and the opinion pieces and the points of view that are going to happen, the speculation. I remember like when the Spectre press release happened, I had to get up at 5 a.m. or something to be able to see it, because it was in England, and it was my best experience with Spectre. It was the anticipation, and it was the excitement that other fans got up that early as well, and we were texting each other and we were like messaging one another about what was being revealed. So actual anticipation sometimes is the best part of this franchise for me. So I'm looking forward to having something to actually anticipate.
Well, and in mid-April, Amazon MGM will make a presentation at CinemaCon, which is the gathering of theater owners. And they didn't have a whole lot to say at last year's CinemaCon, just said that the new producers were in London at work. So maybe maybe this will advance the storyline a bit more, because you think they're going to ask about it. One thing Amazon has done, they've said that Amazon MGM is going to release something like 15 movies a year, which they had barely released any in recent years. So they're acting like they want to be a real studio again.
As long as they don't mean 15 Bond movies a year.
Right, yeah.
Making up for lost time. Here you go.
Well, it is interesting. One quick note. A year ago, when the deal was announced, you go on podcasts and people are making predictions. And one prediction was, Amazon's going to come out with a bunch of streaming shows, stuff like that. And they've shown no indication. I think they really want to get this movie right before they advance into diversification. But that's one fanfare that has not come to be, at least not yet.
Wouldn't it be a nightmare if the film was some sort of backdoor pilot for 5 different shows? Like, yeah. And now we're going to spend some time here in Moneypenny's apartment, and you're like, no.
I keep lobbying for Hawker, Bond's caddy, to get a show. And
Why
May.
not?
Housekeeper May, she's never been in a movie. Like, she could do a cooking show or an actress playing.
Why not?
Yeah, the only thing would be it would just be scrambled eggs every week, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Viewership would fall off because everyone's cholesterol would kill them.
Gone past 40 minutes or thereabouts, so I'll put a pin in it. Phil, thanks very much for being here. Stay in touch.
Thanks for having me.
Be interested to hear your thoughts as more news develops on the Bond front.
Indeed.
David, any closing thoughts?
I don't think I have. No, it's interesting to hear Phil's thoughts, though. So, good to connect with you again.
Good to see you guys again.
All right. Well, listen, thanks to our listeners, and the 007 Files will be back soon. Take care.